The wagon had been burning for 2 days before anyone found it. Black smoke curled into the Montana sky like a question nobody wanted to answer. When Silas Drummond rode past the ridge that morning, he saw buzzards circling and knew someone's story had ended badly. He found the woman first, face down in the dirt 20 yards from the wreckage. Her dress was torn, boots still on her feet, one hand stretched out like she'd been reaching for something. Silas dismounted slow, his knees cracking in the morning cold. He'd seen death before, plenty of it, but something about the way her fingers clawed at the earth made his stomach twist. Then he heard the crying. 2 children huddled beneath a cottonwood tree, the older one clutching the younger like they were both drowning. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, her brother maybe 4. Their faces were streaked with ash and tears, their clothes stiff with dried blood that wasn't theirs. When Silas approached, the girl bared her teeth like a wild animal protecting its den. "Easy now," Silas said, holding up his hands. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The girl didn't move. Her eyes were gray and hard, too old for her face. The boy whimpered into her shoulder, and she tightened her grip on him. Silas crouched down, his shadow falling across them both. "Your mama." The girl's chin trembled, but she didn't speak. That was answer enough. He couldn't leave them. The nearest town was Benton's Creek, 15 miles south, and even if he rode there and back with the sheriff, these children would be dead by nightfall. The temperature dropped fast once the sun went down, and they had no food, no water, no shelter except that tree. "I got a ranch," Silas said quietly. "It ain't much, but it's warm. You can stay there till we figure things out." The girl studied him with those ancient eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice rough as gravel. "What's your name?" "Silas Drummond." "You kill people." "Not unless they need killing." She seemed to consider this. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive, like a general accepting terms of surrender. "I'm Nora. This is my brother Thomas. He don't talk much." "That's all right," Silas said. "Neither do I." Getting them onto his horse was harder than he expected. Thomas screamed when Silas touched him, and Nora had to whisper something in his ear before he'd calm down. They rode double behind Silas, Nora's thin arms wrapped around his waist, Thomas wedged between them. The whole way back to the ranch, Silas could feel the boy trembling like a caught bird. The Drummond place sat in a valley between 2 hills, a small house and barn weathered gray by wind and time. Silas had built most of it himself 10 years ago, back when he thought he might make something of his life. Now it just looked lonely, like a man who'd forgotten what hope felt like. He settled the children in the main room and tried to feed them, but neither would eat. Nora sat on the floor with Thomas in her lap, rocking him while he stared at nothing. Silas made coffee he didn't drink and stood at the window watching darkness swallow the valley. He should have ridden to town right then, should have fetched the sheriff and let someone else deal with this mess. But the girl's face kept swimming up in his memory, those gray eyes that had already seen too much, and he couldn't bring himself to load them back onto the horse. That night he gave them his bed and slept on the floor by the stove. He woke twice to the sound of Thomas screaming, Nora's voice soft and steady as she sang him back to sleep. Some old hymn Silas half remembered from childhood. The melody drifted through the darkness like smoke, and he lay there listening until his chest ached. Morning came cold and bright. Silas made bacon and biscuits, and this time Nora ate, though she watched him the whole time like she expected poison. Thomas still wouldn't touch anything, just pressed himself against his sister and stared at the wall. "How long since he ate?" Silas asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Nora's voice was flat, empty. "He won't take nothing from me neither." Silas nodded. He'd seen men break after battle, seen them stop eating, stop talking, stop caring whether they lived or died. The boy had that same look, like he'd already decided the world wasn't worth staying in. "He likes horses." Nora blinked. "What? Horses, does he like them?" She shrugged, never said. Silas stood and held out his hand. "Come on." They walked to the barn, Thomas still clinging to Nora like she was the only solid thing left in the world. Inside, the air smelled of hay and leather and horse sweat. Silas had 3 animals, an old mare named Beatrice, a temperamental gelding called Rust, and a spotted filly he'd been training since spring. The filly stuck her head over the stall door and nickered soft, her ears pricked forward. Thomas looked up, just a flicker of interest crossing his face before it went dead again. "That's Clover," Silas said. "She's about your age in horse years. You want to say hello." Thomas didn't move, but his eyes tracked the filly as she shifted in her stall. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a wizened apple, holding it flat on his palm. Clover lipped it up gentle, crunching loud in the quiet barn. "She likes apples," Silas said, "and carrots, pretty much anything that ain't nailed down." He looked at Thomas. "You want to feed her?" Still nothing, but the boy's fingers twitched against Nora's dress, and Silas saw the hunger there, the wanting. He found another apple and held it out. Thomas stared at it for a long moment, then slowly, so slowly it hurt to watch, he reached out and took it. His hand was small and pale and shaking. Silas showed him how to hold it flat, how to keep his fingers back so Clover's teeth didn't catch them by accident. When the filly's soft muzzle brushed against Thomas's palm, the boy's whole body went rigid. Then something broke open in his face, something raw and desperate, and tears started streaming down his cheeks. He didn't make a sound, just stood there crying while Clover ate the apple and nuzzled his hand looking for more. Nora put her arm around him, her own eyes wet, and they stayed like that until Thomas finally sagged against her, exhausted. "Can we stay here?" Nora asked, her voice barely a whisper, "just for a while." Silas looked at them both, these broken children with nowhere else to go, and felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent 10 years alone on this ranch, telling himself he preferred it that way. No ties, no complications, no one to disappoint when he inevitably failed them. But standing in that barn with morning light slanting through the gaps in the boards, he realized how quiet his life had become. Not peaceful, just empty. "Yeah," he said, "you can stay." The first week was hard. Silas rode into Benton's Creek and spoke to Sheriff Mackey, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and too much experience with tragedy. The woman's name had been Ruth Callahan, widow traveling from Missouri to Montana with her children. Her wagon had been ambushed 3 days out from Benton's Creek, robbed and burned. No witnesses except the children, and they weren't talking. "What'll happen to them?" Silas asked. Mackey shrugged. "Orphanage in Helena, I suppose, unless you got other ideas." Silas didn't answer right away. He thought about Nora's gray eyes, Thomas's silence, the way they both flinched at sudden movements. He thought about sending them away to some cold institution where they'd just be 2 more lost souls in a building full of ghosts. "I could keep them," he heard himself say, "temporary like, till something better comes along." Mackey studied him. "That's a big responsibility, Silas. Kids ain't like horses. You can't just feed 'em and turn 'em loose." "I know that." "Do you?" The sheriff leaned forward. "People around here know you. They know you ain't exactly sociable. They're gonna talk, having strange children on your ranch, especially a young girl." Heat crawled up Silas's neck. "I ain't like that." "I know you ain't, but folks talk regardless. You sure you want that kind of scrutiny?" Silas thought about it. He thought about riding back to his empty house, eating alone, sleeping alone, dying alone someday with no one to notice for weeks. Then he thought about Thomas feeding Clover this morning, that first real smile breaking across his face like sunrise. "I'm sure." Word spread fast in a town the size of Benton's Creek. By the time Silas rode back to the ranch, half the territory probably knew he'd taken in the Callahan children. He could already imagine the whispers, the sideways looks next time he came to town. Men would wonder what he wanted with a little girl. Women would call him foolish, say he didn't know the first thing about raising children. They were probably right, but he'd made his choice. And Silas Drummond wasn't a man who went back on his word. The children settled in slow, like wild animals learning a place was safe. Thomas started eating again, small bites at first, then full meals. He spent hours in the barn with Clover, brushing her coat and talking to her in whispers too low for Silas to hear. It was the only time he seemed peaceful. Nora was harder to reach. She helped with chores without being asked, scrubbing dishes and sweeping floors and mending Silas's shirts with neat, precise stitches. But she never smiled, never relaxed. She watched Silas constantly, mapping his movements, learning his patterns, looking for the moment he'd turn into someone else, someone dangerous. "You don't gotta be scared of me," Silas told her one evening. They were on the porch, watching Thomas chase chickens in the yard. "I ain't gonna hurt you." "That's what the men said," Nora replied. Her voice was flat as creek stone. "The ones that killed my mama, they said they just wanted food, then they wanted our money, then they wanted—" She trailed off, her jaw tight. "They wanted things they shouldn't have wanted." Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. "Did they?" "No, Mama fought them. She told me to run with Thomas, and I did. We hid in the rocks and watched them." She stopped, swallowed hard. "We watched." He wanted to say something, anything, but no words seemed big enough for that kind of grief. So he just sat there beside her while the sun went down and Thomas's laughter drifted across the yard, bright and fragile as glass. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The children stopped flinching when Silas moved too fast. Thomas started talking again, just a few words at first, then whole sentences. His voice was high and sweet, and hearing it made Silas's chest hurt in ways he didn't understand. Nora remained guarded, but small cracks appeared in her armor. She laughed once when Silas accidentally spilled coffee all over himself. Another time, he caught her singing while she washed dishes, the same hymn she used to calm Thomas, and when she realized he was listening, she didn't stop. The ranch changed too. It felt different now, fuller somehow. Silas started noticing things he'd stopped seeing years ago, the way morning light caught on dewdrops, the sound of birds at dawn, the smell of bread baking in the oven. Nora had found his mother's old recipes and started cooking real meals, not just the beans and bacon Silas had survived on for years. The house smelled like cinnamon and sugar, like someone actually lived there instead of just existing. He taught Thomas how to milk the cow, how to collect eggs without spooking the hens, how to tell when a horse needed its hooves cleaned. The boy followed him everywhere, a small shadow learning the rhythms of ranch life. And slowly, so slowly Silas almost didn't notice, the haunted look faded from Thomas's eyes. But Nora stayed cautious, stayed watchful. Sometimes Silas caught her staring at him with an expression he couldn't read, something between hope and fear, like she was trying to decide whether to trust him or run. Everything changed the day Clayton Ferris rode onto the property. Ferris was a rancher from the next valley over, a big man with a bigger reputation. He owned half the land between Benton's Creek and Helena, and he wasn't known for his kindness. Silas had done some work for him years ago and regretted every minute. "Heard you took in them Callahan kids," Ferris said, not bothering to dismount. His horse shifted under him, nervous. "That true?" "It's true," Silas kept his voice level. "Something you need, Clayton." "Need? No," Ferris smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just being neighborly, wanted to make sure you knew what you was getting into." "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Ferris leaned forward in his saddle. "Because folks are talking, Silas, saying it ain't proper, a single man raising a little girl, saying maybe the sheriff ought to check in, make sure everything's appropriate." Heat flooded Silas's face. "You got something to say, Clayton, say it plain." "I'm just saying there's other options. Good Christian families looking for children to raise proper. The Hendersons been married 15 years, no kids of their own, or the Pratts over in Helena. They got means, got a real house, not some shack in the middle of nowhere." Silas's hands curled into fists. Behind him, he heard the front door creak open. Nora stood on the porch, Thomas half hidden behind her skirt. Her face had gone pale. "These children ain't going nowhere," Silas said quietly. "They're staying with me." Ferris shrugged. "Your choice, but the law sees things different sometimes, especially when concerned citizens raise questions about a child's welfare." He tipped his hat, that same ugly smile on his face. "You take care now, Silas, you and them kids." He rode off, leaving dust and implications hanging in the air. Silas stood frozen, fury and fear warring in his chest. He'd known people would talk, but he hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected someone like Ferris to use the children as leverage for whatever petty grudge he was nursing. Are they gonna take us away? Nora's voice was small, childlike for the first time since Silas had known her. He turned to face her. She looked terrified, and Thomas had started crying, his face buried in her dress. Silas crossed the yard in 3 long strides and knelt in front of them. "No," he said firmly, "nobody's taking you anywhere. You hear me? Nobody." "But he said—" "I don't care what he said. You're staying here, both of you." He looked at Nora, trying to pour every ounce of certainty he possessed into his words. "I promise." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the crack, the moment he'd reveal himself as just another man making promises he couldn't keep. But whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and pulled Thomas closer. That night Silas lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Ferris was right about one thing: unmarried men didn't usually raise children, especially young girls. The law might decide Nora and Thomas would be better off in an orphanage or with another family. And what could Silas offer to prove otherwise? He was just a washed-up cowboy living alone in the middle of nowhere. No wife, no prospects, nothing but his word and his determination. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Unless he changed it. The idea came to him sometime before dawn, crazy and desperate and completely logical. He sat up, his heart pounding, turning it over in his mind. It could work. It might be their only chance. But it meant asking something impossible. He waited until breakfast, until Nora was frying eggs and Thomas was feeding scraps to the barn cat. Then he cleared his throat, suddenly nervous as a green kid at his first dance. "Nora," he said, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up from the stove, her expression wary. "What?" "It's about what Ferris said, about people talking." He ran his hand through his hair, struggling for words. "The thing is, he ain't wrong. The law looks at situations like this and sees problems. Unmarried man, young children, no woman in the house. It don't matter that nothing improper is happening. It matters what it looks like." "So what do we do?" Her voice had gone flat again, defensive. "We change what it looks like." He took a breath. "We get married." The spatula fell from Nora's hand and clattered against the floor. Thomas looked up, confused, and Silas rushed on before he lost his nerve. "Not real married," he said quickly, "just on paper, for show, so nobody can question why you're here, so nobody can take you and Thomas away." He was making a mess of this, he knew, but he couldn't stop. "It wouldn't have to mean nothing. You'd have your own room, your own space. I wouldn't expect nothing from you. It would just be a legal thing to protect you both." Nora stared at him. Color had flooded her cheeks, and Silas couldn't tell if she was angry or embarrassed or shocked. Maybe all three. "You want to marry me," she said slowly. "A child." "You ain't a child," Silas replied. "You're damn near grown, carrying more weight than most adults I know. And I'm talking about a marriage in name only, a protection." "Why?" The question was sharp, cutting. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it?" It was a fair question. Silas thought about all the careful answers he could give, all the practical reasons that made sense. But looking at this girl who'd survived things no one should survive, who'd kept her brother alive through sheer will, who'd somehow started making Silas's empty house feel like a home, he found he couldn't lie. "Because I don't want you to leave," he said quietly. "Because these past few weeks have been the first time in 10 years I didn't feel like I was just waiting to die. Because Thomas laughs now, and you sing sometimes when you think I ain't listening, and I'd rather fight the whole damn territory than watch you disappear into some orphanage or another man's family." He swallowed hard. "Because you make me want to be better than I am." Silence stretched between them. Thomas had stopped playing and was watching them both with wide eyes. Outside, a crow called harsh and lonely. Finally, Nora spoke. "I'm 15 years old. I know. People will talk worse than they already do. I know that too. And you're really saying this don't have to be real?" "I'm saying it can be whatever you want it to be," Silas said. "Now, next year, 10 years from now, I ain't asking for nothing except the chance to keep you both safe." She studied him for a long moment, and Silas felt naked under that grey gaze. Then she bent down, picked up the spatula, and went back to the eggs like nothing had happened. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll marry you." "You will." "But I got conditions." She flipped an egg with practiced ease. "First, you don't never touch me unless I say. Second, if either of us wants out, we get out, no questions. Third, Thomas stays with us no matter what." "Agreed." "And fourth," she paused, spatula hovering over the skillet, "you teach me to shoot, not just plinking at cans, real shooting like my life depends on it." Silas smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "Deal." They were married 3 days later in Sheriff Mackey's office, with 2 witnesses and no celebration. Nora wore a clean dress that had belonged to Silas's mother, found in a trunk she'd somehow unearthed from the back of the barn. It was too big in the shoulders, but she'd altered it as best she could, and standing there in that dusty office with wildflowers someone had stuck in a jar on the desk, she looked older than her years, serious, determined. When Mackey asked if she took Silas to be her husband, she said, "I do," like she was taking an oath before battle. And maybe she was. Word spread faster this time. By the end of the week, everyone in Benton's Creek knew Silas Drummond had married the Callahan girl. The reactions were mixed. Some people nodded their approval, seeing a man doing his duty. Others whispered that it was unseemly, suspicious, wrong. Clayton Ferris, when he heard, reportedly laughed until he cried. But no one could legally challenge it now. Nora was Silas's wife, Thomas his responsibility. They were a family in the eyes of the law, and that was all that mattered. Life on the ranch continued, mostly unchanged. Nora still slept in her own room with Thomas. She still cooked and cleaned and kept the house running. Silas still worked from dawn to dusk, fixing fences and tending animals and doing all the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch alive. But something subtle had shifted, some invisible line crossed that made everything feel different. They were more careful around each other now. Silas found himself noticing things he shouldn't, the way Nora's hair caught the light, the curve of her neck when she leaned over the stove, the sound of her humming while she worked. He'd catch himself staring and force his eyes away, ashamed. She was too young, too broken, too much under his protection for him to think of her that way. But the thoughts came anyway, unwanted and insistent. Nora seemed to feel it too. She started watching him differently, not with suspicion anymore, but with something else. Curiosity, maybe, or awareness. Sometimes their hands would brush reaching for the same thing, and they'd both pull back like they'd been burned. The air between them grew heavy with things neither could say. True to his word, Silas taught her to shoot. They spent evenings in the field behind the barn, Nora learning to hold the rifle steady, to breathe through the recoil, to hit targets at 50 yards, then 100. She was a natural, her hands steady and her eyes sharp. Watching her improve week by week filled Silas with a pride he didn't fully understand. "Why'd you want to learn this so bad?" he asked one evening after she'd hit 6 bottles in a row without missing. She lowered the rifle, her expression distant. "Because next time someone tries to hurt the people I love, I want to be able to stop them." The way she said it, flat and certain, made Silas's chest tighten. He wanted to tell her she'd never have to stop anyone, that he'd protect her forever. But they both knew that was a lie. The world was cruel and random, and all anyone could do was learn to fight back. "You're getting good," he said instead. "I know," she met his eyes. "That's the point." Summer faded into fall, and fall into winter. Snow came early that year, blanketing the valley in white silence. Thomas turned 5 in November, and Nora baked him a cake using sugar they couldn't really afford. The boy laughed so hard he choked on frosting, and Silas and Nora both rushed to help him, their hands tangling together, their eyes meeting over Thomas's head in a moment so charged with unspoken feeling that Silas had to look away. Christmas came and went. Silas carved Thomas a wooden horse, and Nora gave him a scarf she'd knitted in secret, the stitches uneven but made with care. On Christmas morning, he found a pair of mended work gloves under the tree with a note in Nora's careful handwriting. "Your old ones had holes. N." Such a small thing, but holding those gloves, imagining her sitting by lamplight repairing them while he slept, Silas felt something crack open inside him. He was falling for her. had been falling for months, maybe since that first day in the barn when she'd agreed to stay, and it terrified him. She was 15, his wife in name only, under his care and protection. Everything about this was wrong. But when she smiled at him over breakfast, when she sang Thomas to sleep at night, when she stood beside him in the field with rifle smoke curling around her face, Silas couldn't make himself regret it, couldn't make himself want anything different. Winter deepened. They were snowed in for a week in January. The three of them crowded around the stove while wind howled outside. Thomas complained about being bored, so Nora taught him his letters using a piece of charcoal and the back of an old calendar. Silas watched them, the girl barely older than a child herself teaching her brother to read, and felt his heart break with the beauty of it. One night, unable to sleep, he got up for water and found Nora sitting by the window. Moonlight turned her hair silver, made her look like something out of a dream. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. Too many thoughts. He should have gone back to bed, should have given her privacy, space, distance. Instead, he sat beside her, careful not to touch, and they watched the snow together in silence. "I've been thinking," Nora said after a while, "about what you said when you asked me to marry you." Silas's pulse kicked up. "What about it?" "You said it could be whatever I wanted. Now, next year, 10 years from now." She turned to face him, her eyes dark in the dim light. "What if I wanted it to be real?" The world seemed to stop. Silas stared at her, his mind gone blank. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Her voice was steady, certain. "I ain't a child, Silas. You said that yourself. I've seen things, done things, survived things that would break most grown folks, and I know my own mind." "Nora." "I'm not asking for nothing you don't want to give," she continued, "but I need you to know how I feel, what I want." She took a breath. "I want this to be real. I want us to be real, not now, not right away, but someday, when I'm ready, when we're both ready." Silas couldn't breathe. Everything he'd been trying not to feel, all the careful walls he'd built around his heart, came crashing down in the space of her confession. "I'm twice your age," he said hoarsely. "I don't care. People will talk. They already do. You could do better, find someone younger, someone who—" "I don't want someone else." Her hand found his in the darkness, small and warm and certain. "I want you, the man who found us when we had nothing, who took us in when he didn't have to, who taught me to be strong again." Her fingers tightened. "I want you, Silas Drummond, just you." He looked at their joined hands, then at her face, at the determination and hope and something that might have been love shining in her eyes. And he thought about all the reasons this was wrong, all the ways it could go bad. Then he thought about spending the rest of his life without her, watching her leave someday to marry another man, and he knew he couldn't do it. "Not yet," he said finally. "You're too young yet, no matter what you say, but someday." He swallowed hard. "Someday, if you still want this, if you still want me, then yes, I'll make it real." She smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That's all I needed to hear." They sat together until dawn, hands clasped, not speaking, just being. And for the first time since he'd found those children under that cottonwood tree, Silas let himself believe in the possibility of happiness. Spring came late but fierce, melting snow and turning the valley green overnight. Thomas sprouted like a weed, growing so fast his pants were too short before Nora could let them out. He started calling Silas Pa without anyone telling him to, and the first time Silas heard it, he had to turn away so the boy wouldn't see him cry. Nora bloomed too. She'd always been pretty in a sharp, fierce way, but now she softened somehow, laughed easier, moved through the house with a lightness that hadn't been there before. She was still tough, still careful, still practiced shooting twice a week like her life depended on it, but she'd stopped looking over her shoulder quite so often, stopped flinching at shadows. She was healing, they all were. In May, Clayton Ferris rode onto the property again, but this time, Silas saw him coming and met him at the property line, rifle held loose at his side. "That's far enough, Clayton." Ferris pulled up short, his eyes narrowing, "just being neighborly." "We both know that ain't true." Now turn around and get off my land." "Your land," Ferris laughed. "You mean this little patch of nothing? Come on, Silas, you really think you can make it out here? Man like you, playing house with borrowed children." "They ain't borrowed, they're mine." Silas's voice was hard as iron. "And I'll thank you to stay away from my family." Something dangerous flashed in Ferris's eyes. "You're making a mistake, Drummond. You and that little wife of yours. One day you're gonna wake up and realize you're in over your head." "Maybe," Silas said, "but it'll be my mistake to make. Now get." Ferris stared at him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. Silas watched him go, adrenaline singing through his veins, and didn't lower the rifle until the man was out of sight. When he turned back toward the house, he found Nora standing on the porch, her own rifle in her hands. She'd come out to back him up, ready to fight if needed. Their eyes met across the yard, and something passed between them, some wordless understanding that they were in this together. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Silas found Nora in the kitchen washing dishes. He stood in the doorway watching her, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the way she hummed under her breath, the simple miracle of her being here at all. "Nora," he said softly. She turned, hands still wet from the dishwater. "Yeah." "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for choosing this, for," he struggled for words, "for changing my life." She smiled, and it was the same smile she'd given him that night by the window, full of promise and patience, and a love that was learning to bloom in its own time. "You changed mine too," she said. 2 years passed before Silas kissed her for the first time. She was 17 by then, nearly 18, and the last traces of girlhood had burned away, leaving someone stronger and fiercer and more beautiful than he'd ever imagined. They were in the barn, Nora helping him deliver a foal, both of them covered in sweat and hay and birth fluids. When the filly finally slid free and took her first shaky breath, Nora laughed with pure joy and turned to Silas, her eyes bright with triumph. And he couldn't help himself. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and everything Silas had been holding back for 2 long years poured into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled against his mouth. "Took you long enough," she whispered. "Had to wait till you were ready." "I've been ready." She kissed him again, deeper this time. "I've been ready since the day you taught me to shoot." They made their marriage real that night. In the bedroom they'd kept separate for 2 years, but now finally shared. And it felt right, felt earned, like something they'd both waited for long enough to deserve. Thomas, 9 years old now and wise beyond his years, didn't seem surprised when they told him. He just grinned and said, "Finally, Nora's been mopping for ages." "I have not," Nora protested, but she was blushing. Life continued. Seasons turned. The ranch prospered bit by bit. They bought more land, more animals, hired a hand to help with the heavy work. Thomas grew tall and strong, learning everything Silas could teach him about horses and cattle and the hard business of survival. And 4 years after Silas found them under that cottonwood tree, Nora gave birth to a daughter. They named her Ruth, after the mother she'd never know, and when Silas held his daughter for the first time, he wept openly. He thought about that day on the ridge, about finding the burning wagon and the woman in the dirt, about the choice he'd made to stop, to help, to take in 2 broken children when every practical bone in his body screamed at him to ride on. If he hadn't stopped, he'd still be alone, still be that empty man living in an empty house, waiting for death to notice him. Instead, he had this: a wife he loved more than breathing, a son in all but blood, a daughter squirming in his arms, already demanding attention, a life so full of noise and chaos and love that sometimes he couldn't believe it was real. "You all right?" Nora asked from the bed. She looked tired but radiant, her hair spread across the pillow like a river of dark water. "Yeah," Silas said, his voice rough, "just thinking about how lucky I am." "We're lucky," she corrected, "all of us. You gave us a home when we had nothing, a family, a future." She held out her hand. "Come here." He sat beside her, the baby between them, and felt Nora's head rest against his shoulder. Through the window, he could see Thomas in the yard playing with Clover, now a grown mare, but still gentle as a lamb with the boy who'd once fed her apples with shaking hands. "They saved me," Silas said quietly. "You all did. I was drowning before you came along, I just didn't know it. Then I guess we saved each other." And looking at his family, his life, everything that had grown from one moment of choosing to stop and help, Silas knew she was right. They'd saved each other, the cowboy and the stranger's children, the broken pieces that had somehow fit together to make something whole. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the valley gold and orange and red. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. And in this small house in the middle of Montana, 3 people who'd lost everything found what they'd been searching for all along. Each other and home.